I tell OpenClaw, hey, make this reservation at this restaurant. And the OpenClaw like, yeah, I actually know exactly when that reservation is going to open up. But at the same time, it looks like this restaurant requires a card number on file. So please give me your card number so I can enter it using browser use when the reservation becomes available. And I was like, oh man, there's absolutely no way I'm giving my Chase Sapphire Reserve with a $20,000 limit to an OpenClaw. I actually think that clothes are probably one of the last things that agents buy on behalf of consumers. And why is that? Well, it's because buying clothes requires a ton of taste. And the last thing that we're going to delegate to agents is things that require taste. The items that I think will go first to agentic are things that are high intent, fungible, and probably scarce, because that's where agents are 10x better or 100x better than the existing experience for consumers. We took nervous parents and built the guardrails and controls to make sure they felt comfortable with their teens spending money. We need to be building controls for humans to feel safe as they delegate their spend to their agents. Agentic commerce will be the lion's share of consumer spend in future years. And the reason for that is because for any given human intent, an agent can find an item that is higher quality, cheaper, and gets to the user faster because they can scour the internet and go on thousands of websites, find the most trustworthy ones, and look for the item and find it. Right now, the trust barrier and the payments barrier are things that need to be broken.
One of the most annoying things for me personally is having to go figure out what I need to purchase with regard to groceries, go either into the store or get the groceries online, go through the checkout, add all the items. And this is a reoccurring thing that I do quite often, and most people do. What's interesting here is with the agentic economy, agents could potentially understand the things that I need, go and find these websites or even find the best price for different products and make the purchases themselves. And this is exactly why we brought Dasmer from Allowance, a former product lead at Cash App working on consumer agentic payments. With Allowance, consumers can essentially put in their request and an agent goes and uses a policy-bound spending limit to purchase goods. So Dasmer, you were 2 seats positions behind Jack Dorsey at Block/Square. Can you tell us about your experience and what we were doing, and then we can get into payments after that?
Yeah, at Cash App, at Block, I was head of product of the families team, which basically means teens and parents at Cash App. When I joined Cash App, we had just launched the teen program. Today, it's become the largest teen banking product in the country, with more than 5 million monthly active teens. For a teen to use Cash App, their parent has to approve them to use Cash App. And for their parent to approve, they need to trust that Cash App is the right place for their teen to be banking. And they need to trust that their teen, the 13-year-old, will not overspend, will not buy the wrong thing, and is safe and is not going to be scammed on the platform. So a lot of my work at Cash App specifically was around making sure that parents felt safe and teens were safe on Cash App.
What are the ways that parents actually do feel safe? What does that actually mean as a product lead? How does that actually come into fruition?
Yeah, it's a good question. I spoke to hundreds of parents in my almost 4 years there. Different families have different situations, but there were definitely some themes overall. So this is actually maybe counterintuitive, but parents didn't necessarily want to be notified of every single transaction that their teen was making. They actually want their teen to become financially independent, and they wanted their teen to be autonomous with the way they're spending money, and they basically build a sense of responsibility at an early age. When the stakes are lower, they're not having to pay a mortgage or a rent to have bills on them, etc. as well. So yeah, a parent didn't necessarily want to receive notifications on every single payment their teen was making. The average teen made a lot of payments every month, and it would actually be kind of spamming the parent. But at the same time, the parent wanted to feel like if something were to potentially be wrong, that they were involved and Cash App had their back. For example, your teen is paying someone for the very first time. That could be potentially something that a parent might want to be notified about. So instead of notifying them every time they're paying the same trusted people again and again, or shopping at the same merchants again and again, we would have some set of heuristics as well as some machine learning models that would basically decide whether or not this payment is risky enough to warrant either blocking outright, pausing so the parent can approve or deny the payment, or just notifying the parent after the fact. So just that they're always in the know. But for most purchases, by default, we did not actually send notifications. We actually let the parent decide that on their own.
Okay, interesting. So you spend a lot of time basically working with parents, which kind of almost feel like regulators, right? Like the same experience you feel with regulators, you have this kind of like regulator style archetype, which is the parents. So you're working that for a couple years, and it was managing a relatively large team at Cash App. And then something happened, basically. You experienced OpenClaw, if I'm not mistaken, and that turned into this extended journey of where you're at now with Allowance. Can you take us through that process and the experience that you had to kind of get to where you are now?
Yeah, so this is like maybe the last Sunday of January. I guess like the last week of January, Twitter was just OpenClaw everywhere.
Yeah.
It was just like everyone had this aha moment that was on Twitter, X, I guess. I went to my old MacBook Air that I wasn't using anymore, and I wiped it clean, and I installed OpenClaw on it for the very first time. I remember I was actually home for the weekend with my family, and my sister was in town as well. And she was like, "What are you doing on this machine?" And I was like, like OpenClaw is really cool. Like agents can now control your computer, and this thing is always on, so you can do whatever you want on the computer. Oh, she's like, "My birthday's coming up in a few weeks, and I'm trying to get a reservation at this really hard to get restaurant in New York City. Do you think your OpenClaw can do this?" And I was like, "Actually, it's a pretty good idea. Let me go try it." I tell OpenClaw, "Hey, make this reservation at this restaurant." And the OpenClaw like, "Yeah, I actually know exactly when that reservation is going to open up. I can like set a heartbeat and basically start checking a few minutes before and a few minutes later, so I get it with a high degree of probability. But at the same time, it looks like this restaurant requires a card number on file. So please give me your card number so I can enter it using browser use when the reservation becomes available." And I was like, "Oh man, there's absolutely no way I'm giving my Chase Sapphire Reserve with a $20,000 limit to an OpenClaw." Like, mind you, like, I mean, OpenClaw still has many security like loopholes, but back then it was like there were horror stories of what OpenClaw was doing because of the fact that there's just like very few guardrails on OpenClaw overall. So I didn't give it my $20,000 limit with Chase Sapphire Reserve, and instead like I created some virtual card with some other website online, and I actually got that reservation. But it kind of like it hit me right there, which is like there's no agent first way to give your agents a wallet. And my first thought was we at Cash App should be building this thing. And I emailed Jack the next day saying, "Hey, we basically won the trust of parents comfortable delegating spend control to their teens. We were best in class at that. Heck, we wrote a white paper on this. Myself and the chief risk officer at Block actually published a white paper on the Block website on like how to delegate spend with teens safely and become best in class at that. Let's do the same thing for agents. Like, it's so obvious agentic commerce is going to become the future. I have a number of reasons for why I think that is. The barrier in agentic commerce is going to be the trust problem, just like it was for parents, their teens. Most of America already does not trust artificial intelligence. They definitely do not trust artificial intelligence with their payment credentials. And today they shouldn't. Like, there's just no good solution out there. At least back then there wasn't. I asked Jack if like we can build this in-house. And while he liked the idea, he replied the next day. He said that our roadmaps are just massive right now. So it's not something we can do in like the near future, but maybe next year, maybe 2027. I mean, had Venmo and Cash App launched a year later, like they may not. Being first to market and like in these new situations actually matters a lot.
Yeah.
And that was my prompt. Okay, it's time to build this on my own. The YC deadline was less than 5 days after that email. So I put together an application, and the rest is history.
Wow. Well, congrats on that, man. Yeah, just Jack Dorsey. We need to enable agentic payments and then YC and now Allowance. So yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, things moved really. That was quite a week. Things moved really fast.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So now that we kind of got some background for this agentic payments piece, I'm curious to understand, like, why do you think it resonated so much kind of with the OpenClaw experience and with the card experience? What did you think could happen? What was the kind of like the future thinking that transpired from that?
Yeah, it's a good question. When ChatGPT came out, I had this aha moment, which was like, wow, Silicon can finally reason on our behalf. And it was like, I knew right there that like we're going to go through a very transformative time in like the arc of human innovation overall. And I was like, yeah, it was like things sort of moved as expected, and AI has obviously made a massive change in the way that we work today. But the closest thing since ChatGPT moment was the OpenClaw moment, because it was for the very first time, agents were doing things. They were taking over a computer and doing anything a human could do on a computer, which really changed the way I thought about the future of work overall. In terms of like where the connection comes with the card, I guess like we already know that humans are starting their shopping journeys on ChatGPT. Last year, it became super normal for a human to say, hey, I'm in a well-lit room and I want a TV for this room and I want it more for sports than for video games, and my budget is $800. Can you give me the 3 top TVs that are in that price range, optimized for my personal experience, and give me the pros and cons of each? So you have a conversation with ChatGPT. You come to basically the TV that's right for you. The problem is that you actually can't go and complete that purchase. OpenClaw for the very first time, what I noticed was, for the first time, like with Playwright or whatever technology it was using, it was able to like control Chrome and do things in Chrome and do research in Chrome and fill out forms in Chrome. And it's almost weird that it wasn't able to just like easily make purchases without exposing private payment data, payment credentials. And therefore, it just seems so obvious at the time that we needed a better solution here. And thinking about it even more since then, agents are going to be the way that consumers spend money, or agentic commerce will be the lion's share of consumer spend in future years. And the reason for that is because for any given human intent, an agent can find an item that is higher quality, that is cheaper, and gets to the user faster, because they can scour the internet and go on thousands of websites, find the most trustworthy ones, and look for that item and find it. Like the friction to actually go and find the thing, it basically made the entire internet a marketplace that it can on its own find information for. And right now it's using browser use, but in the future, it's going to be like catalogs of JSON files or something that's like very easy for the computer to understand. Anyway, I think there's shopping via agents is just going to be a way more efficient way to shop than having humans do it themselves. And therefore, I think a lot of commerce is just going to happen via agents. Right now, the trust barrier and the payments barrier are things that need to be broken. Well, those are opportunities today.
For this big landscape, right? Like the agentic payments and commerce and economy, there's kind of like 3 stacks, and one is just payments, one is merchants and payments, and then one is work, merchants and payments. For these use cases, what do you think is going to stick early? Do you think it's shopping for clothes? Is it paying for API services? What do you think is going to be like the OpenClaw moment for people to use agents to make payments? Because a lot of people don't even use agents in the first place, or even know what agents are.
Yeah. Good question. So I think like probably the first thing, and this is already happening to that extent, the first agentic purchases at scale are going to be the ones that are developers doing things to buy things, etc. Now agents are becoming engineers. Like they're actually replacing developers to some extent. And now like they need access to some new API. Ideally, they don't need to interrupt a user to go and log into an account or create some account and enter their payment information, etc. There should be a really, really straightforward machine agent to agent method of them basically like being able to pay for their API access. There's already been some hacking of this to some extent in terms of like, yeah, if an agent can just go use computer use and go and create the account and go and enter payment information, etc. as well. And that works well. But there's already the proliferation of announcements of like X402 or MPP, etc. that are meant to do exactly this. And I think that they have quite a bit of promise. It's still extremely early and we'll see where that all plays out. But I do think that if developers are the first folks that are using agents and they also have clear use cases to use agents, especially as a lot of the code they write and decisions that are being made for developers are happening with their agents themselves, it makes a ton of sense for agentic commerce to start with developers. I think that for consumers, it's a bit different. You asked if people will be buying clothes with their agents, and I actually think that clothes are probably one of the last things that agents buy on behalf of consumers. And why is that? Well, it's because, buying clothes requires a ton of taste, and the last thing that we're going to delegate to agents is things that require taste. They're not like a fungible item. You actually want, heck, it took a very long time for clothes to go from going in store and trying it on and feeling the item to actually being able to just like buy it, like to go online and buy it. And even today, even e-commerce, when you're buying clothes, it's like kind of broken, like because of like you don't exactly know how it feels or how exactly it fits. Often people will buy 7 items and try them on and then like return 6 and keep 1. And I actually think that it's much easier for a user to go on a website and browse multiple items and find the one they want for a piece of clothing or something that requires taste versus like speaking to a chatbot. On the other hand, the items that I think will go first to agentic are things that are high intent, fungible, and probably scarce, because that's where agents are 10x better or 100x better than the existing experience for consumers. So, for example, getting tickets to some event, or the use case I started with, getting the reservation as well. You don't have to be refreshing for that thing or keep checking for that thing. Today, we have notifications when like tickets become available or reservations become available, but it doesn't go that last mile to actually make that purchase. That's where things feel at least an order of magnitude better to use agents versus to like do it yourself. There's a ton of other use cases I think that are interesting. I think the first one is probably going to be like these scarce things that have time sensitivity specifically. But I do think that relative to developers, most consumers, to your point, don't use agents. And there needs to be a more consumer first way to actually start buying things with agents as well. And I think that piece is very much missing today. Like most consumers don't have a Mac Mini running 24/7. Most consumers don't have an OpenClaw. They don't even know how to set up an OpenClaw or don't know what a terminal is or an NPM is. Yeah, they're not technical. And like they shouldn't have to be technical to get the value props of agentic commerce.
So this kind of leads into exactly what you're working on with Allowance. Can you give like an overview of what you're building and really you're taking the consumer route where a lot of folks are, that we've talked to at least are focusing on like machine to machine payments, paying for APIs, paying for go-to-market material, paying for inference. You're kind of like in a whole separate bucket of not many people who are focused on the consumer and the end user. And right now, what a lot of people complain about from the builder side is basically there's not a experience for users to kind of like use a normal app or like chatbot. A lot of these tools are in like Claude Code or Codex CLI based tools. And that's basically exactly what you're building. So can you give like some background understanding and like the design methodology around how you're building and some of the functionality?
Yeah, I guess like when I left Block to go and build Allowance, I kind of started by solving for myself, which was solving for that OpenClaw use case, which is actually pretty developer first, which was, hey, I want to be able to give my OpenClaw a wallet. I want to be able to control every single purchase it makes early on, particularly. So I built an iPhone app that via MCP also connects to your Allowance account, and that Allowance account connects to your OpenClaw, your Claude Code, or your Codex via an MCP or a CLI. And any of my agents would be able to basically say, hey, I want to spend up to X dollars to buy anything. And it would send my Allowance app a push notification, and I could basically approve or reject that request. But I'm giving permissions via the app itself. And it would create a one-time card number that the agent could then use for that particular thing with a particular limit. When I launched this, I started speaking with a ton of customers about what their feedback was and how they might want to use it. And I always thought it was going to be building something for consumers, but it was almost obvious, like maybe 96% of people were like, this is really cool. But I don't know how to use an OpenClaw. I don't know what a terminal is. I don't know what NPM or skills.md or CLI, MCP, these are all just acronyms to me. And that's sort of how I started building, which is where the Allowance app is today, which is like, hey, you already need an app in order to approve or reject and manage your permissions for your agents. Let's just put the chat tab in that app itself. And therefore, you're not tied to a Mac Mini that's always on. You're not tied to any laptop or machine at all. I guess like within minutes of downloading the app, you can go on to make your first ever agentic commerce purchase, no MCP CLI or any setup required. It's the easiest way, I think, in the world today to do an end-to-end agentic payments purchase. Yeah, it's the only consumer-friendly agentic commerce like platform today.
And for your application, is there limitations around the destinations or like the supported merchants that users can use? Or can I go on Amazon? Is it, Shopify? Or are you using the protocols that currently exist, like ACP or Shopify has a protocol, X402, MPP? Like, what is the suite of available supply, right?
Yeah, it's a good question. So today there is a list of merchants that are supported. And that's mostly because the chat tab is just so new and we want to make sure that every single merchant we add is reliable. The vision is like the experience for using Allowance, whether it's via chat tab or whether it's via using any other channel, we're going to be building many more channels as well in order to basically ask agents to spend on your behalf, should be as similar as possible as you asking your own personal human assistant to buy you things. And your personal human assistant can buy you things anywhere on the internet. And therefore, Allowance will be supporting inside the chat tab anywhere on the internet. It's more about like, how do we make sure that's done reliably, especially given that the experience is so new. Whether we use the credit card rails or whether we use MPP or X402 matters a lot less. Generally, what I care about is have consumers and merchants sufficiently adopted the protocol that we're using. And today, the only protocol that, I don't know if you can call this a protocol, both like consumers and merchants have adopted are credit card rails. They've been around for decades. And that's why I've been focused on building on existing card rails versus like waiting for these new ones, which are better for LLMs and better for agentic or faster or more reliable, because it's going to take quite a bit of time for those rails to really spawn. I mean, they've been announced. Like, I feel like every quarter we hear some new announcement of some new protocol or some new like way for agentic commerce to sort of spring up. But then because those protocols require quite a bit of coordination by many large parties, it sort of struggles to get past that initial announcement. And I think it'll get there. I think that waiting until that happens is probably not the right path, given that today's tools can actually get us pretty far along.
Yeah, I've been asking a lot of people the difference between card rails and stablecoin rails and all the different protocols. Kind of what I'm seeing is there hasn't been crazy adoption amongst all the different protocols. I think the crypto rails probably has had the most, but even some of the stuff that Cloudflare is supporting and Shopify, whether it's like gating, micropayments to website access or from Shopify, like being able to purchase on these different platforms. Even with Shopify, you have to still like manually type in your card information. So I think the user experience is almost bottlenecked by like the interface at this point. I'm curious for you, do you agree with that? Or do you think that as a builder working on this, is the harder part getting the users, or is it actually, making the connections and like a clean policy bound path to purchase?
It's a good question. I think you're right that the products that are built on the new protocols are a tad bit unfinished. I think that generally, like for consumers to adopt something, the customer experience, like the value prop you're providing them has to be 10x better than what the status quo is. Yeah. And also the experience to actually onboard and the time like has to be really, really easy. And like the time to value has to be very clear for the user. When you're entering a card number anyway on Shopify, it sort of breaks the entire experience right there. And it's no longer easy for the customer to do. They could have gone on the Shopify website themselves and bought it themselves. It only becomes significantly better when an entire end-to-end purchase is being made on your behalf. The nice thing is that like even without these protocols, with browser use, an agent can do it on their own and they don't necessarily need these protocols at all. Now, is it slower for an agent to be browsing a web and managing your GUI versus using the plain text or like ASCII text that is coming from a protocol? 1000% yes. But if that requires a user to create a new funding source or create a new account or have to KYC or have to basically like onboard to something new, it just becomes a lot less of a strong enough value prop for the user to necessarily want to do it.
Yeah. I think what you just identified is a huge bottleneck actually right now, where the protocols are decent, but they're not like all the way there, because there's like something slightly missing on each one. So for instance, like X2 and MPP, you have to onboard someone onto a wallet, and that can be friction. And for enterprises or like businesses, a lot of times they don't want to use like a wallet, right? As opposed to like fiat account management, things like that. But then on the flip side, these are purpose built for agents, but the experience and kind of the breadth of services is on the traditional rails, and the traditional being like human literally typing in Amazon to purchase something. So it's kind of this weird chicken and an egg problem, or like dichotomy between, do you use the protocols or do you use something like browser use or browser base to traverse the sites, which probably leads to more supply in general. So that's pretty interesting. And it seems like you're finding more value by using these browser automation tools. Is that correct?
You're 1000% right. I don't know as a user why I would need to have to create a new wallet just to buy something. I already have enough accounts. I don't want to have to be creating new bank accounts or like as I mentioned before, I don't think most consumers in the US trust AI. I also don't think most consumers in the US trust crypto. I know like we've seen more adoption internationally for stablecoin, but I just don't think that like stablecoin adoption is nearly like, I don't think we have a significant penetration from like consumers in the US, and I don't expect to see that in the next few years, candidly speaking, either. There's just no straight value prop. While like my Chase Sapphire Reserve, I already have that account. I already get a ton of great benefit on that account. I also already have protections, and like I have a relationship with this bank that I trust with my hard-earned money. Why would I go and break all of that for something that seems a little like something that like, I don't know, I'm just less familiar with and could have some more risks with it as well. Now, would I prefer that there was a protocol where I could, and there are these, it's just like we don't have the merchant adoption for them, but like our protocols where instead of having to traverse a website, I could just pass and send back and forth a JSON blob to get catalog information to check out and basically enter like a tokenized version of a card as well. And therefore it would be the fastest and cleanest customer experience as well, 1000%. But the fact is 99.9% of merchants in the US don't support those protocols today.
Yeah, it's a bit tough. I know browser base allows you to kind of like turn a website into API, but still, there's like the nuance, and, if the website changes and things like that, you can kind of break down the experience. How are you handling that? Like, how are you able to kind of make sure that the purchase is completed? Do you basically have like a fixed list, or can people put in their requests? I think you might have touched on this earlier, but yeah, just to verify.
I have a list today. It was more about like with the Allowance chat tab, the goal with the first launch was more of a proof of concept around can we make agentic commerce so easy that any consumer can get from app download to first purchase in less than 5 minutes. And it was for non-technical people to use and make purchases. And the answer was a resounding yes. The initial list was chosen not because we are actively looking for changes to those websites and making sure they're reliable. Like reliability was definitely a concern, and I wanted to make sure like they're reliable before we launch. But actually, like changes to websites are not so much of an issue anymore because of the fact that we have intelligence. If a human sees a website change, they'll be able to figure out how to maneuver it again. It might slow them down the first time, but then they'll learn again and then be able to use it. With intelligence, you can do exactly the same thing. So you actually don't need a human in the loop to make adjustments when the websites change, which is kind of like the power of like just artificial intelligence overall.
Mm-hmm. And this is like a broader like defensibility question. With someone like Anthropic and like Visa, more recently Visa and OpenAI have partnered and basically launched like an agentic commerce experience. Yep. My question for you is, how do you remain defensible if there's like a lot of these incumbents like Stripe and Mastercard, Visa? There's all these different providers that are currently actively trying to figure out their footing. Actually, I don't think anyone's quite figured it out. But
Yeah.
with all of this, it's a competitive environment. How do you stay reactive and defensible?
It's a good question. I guess like the partners you mentioned, Visa, Mastercard, Stripe, they're all partners of Allowance today. We actually we're partnered by Visa Intelligent Commerce. I was at their office last week. We are partnered by Mastercard Agent Pay. We have ongoing discussions with Stripe as well about like building something on the agentic side with them as well. And I think the DNA of the card networks is to make sure that they're creating as many tokens as possible. I don't think it matters to them whether or not they necessarily have a customer, like a consumer facing experience necessarily. And that's always been the way that they've gone to market, etc. Like they have a massive moat, which is just the network itself. And their job is to protect that. With Stripe, I think that Stripe is best in class at building for developers. That's sort of how they started. And like even they've had a really impressive launch with their recent Link CLI, which basically enables folks to send and spend requests to their agents, etc. as well. But it's very much like the initial launch that I had, which was an MCP, or CLI itself. So it's developer first. I think it'll be an important tool for developers as they build for agentic. And I think you mentioned OpenAI as well in the beginning, or Claude. Like they are extremely interested in agentic commerce because they understand like the potential for it to change the way that consumers shop around the world. I do think that most consumers are not going to be shopping with just one agent. They're going to be having multiple agents buying on their behalf, whether it's like the ChatGPT agent or whether it's going to be your Claude agent or whether like you asked Google to buy you something, or there's going to be merchants that just don't want to integrate with those agents at all because Amazon doesn't want to lose that customer relationship. That is where the value is, and therefore it decides to build its own agent. Heck, it's hard to predict where the world goes, but you might even have like a healthcare agent that connects to your doctor, and basically that's the one that sort of orders your medicine for you. So you have another agent that orders medicine for you. You have one that basically decides whether your household essentials are stocked at home as well. And those could all be different agents, and they all need a way to spend money. And I actually think that that's what really creates the space for a consumer neutral wallet that can basically be the provisioning layer for agentic spend across all of your agents.
Interesting. Yeah, like, and I think we kind of see that today where there's, specialized tooling for different purposes, whether that's, across the traditional world. You have like a set of tools that you're going to be using to do certain things, even cards, like, or bank accounts and things like that. And versus agents, I do agree on kind of having like business ones and then maybe personal. For you, I want to understand your mental model of the future of kind of what you think maybe like a year or two looks like with the scaling, as quick as and strong as these agents are getting in the first place. But also to throw in like labor, if you can kind of book a flight end to end, there is some like cutting of corners essentially, and it makes it super easy for the consumer. But what do you kind of see as, the next couple years when it comes to labor and when it comes to where like the state of the agent economy will be at?
When you say labor, do you mean like, oh, like now that we're having agents book on your behalf, like travel agents will no longer have a job? Is that sort of what you're like?
Yeah, I'm curious because I'm not sure if they won't or if like the value moves. So I think like one thing that I've seen is taste kind of it becomes more pronounced, like you were talking about earlier, where maybe there's like a hypothetical, right, with being able to buy clothes instead of an agent like buying the clothes. Maybe it contracts and does bidding against designers, and they can kind of quickly propose their bids for someone like me or for some shirts or some outfits for the weekend or whatever, and kind of that taste piece can be delegated to humans. So maybe that's how like a shopping experience evolves, and you just have all these different, personal designers, right? For these other markets, traditionally we've seen like with design, they're just new designs. And then we've had like a growth of just digital design in general, right? Whether that's like video or animation, all this stuff over the years. So yeah, along those lines, not necessarily that jobs will be removed. Maybe you think they do, but yeah, just kind of where do you see the landscape?
I think that most of the purchases that, like I said, I'm not confident that jobs will be removed because of agentic commerce specifically. I think a lot of the purchases that we've been talking about are ones that, I mean, most flights today are not booked by travel agents. They're booked by like Expedia or whatever the travel websites are. I do think we're going to see is a number of agentic, basically fewer purchases made on websites by humans and more purchases made via website, or hopefully if the protocols sort of start getting higher adoption, the protocols themselves. And we're already seeing that, which is like, I think Stripe in Stripe sessions actually showed a chart, which is like how often their API docs are read by a human versus via an AI agent. And they basically plotted it over time. And I guess this was back in, I think Stripe sessions at the end of April, or maybe May. And like at that point, they'd already seen that like the two have crossed sometime in the last few months. And now more API docs are being read by agents than they are by humans. And I think that's just like a pattern we're going to see across the board. Most of the internet will be like most volume or traffic on the internet is going to be agentic traffic and not human traffic in the next 2 years. And when that happens, that also involves commerce and shopping as well. So I do think that like most flights 2 years from now are probably not going to be booked by a human tapping on Expedia, but instead the human telling their agent that, hey, I want to go from San Francisco to New York on this date, get me the cheapest flights. I like a window seat, and like I have American Airlines points, so like it's going to be personal to you, but it's basically going to be replacing, like in the world of a travel agent, you had a more personalized experience because that like you could tell your travel agent, I want all of these things, get me the cheapest flights for those things. And you kind of lost that when the internet happened, because now you were the one sort of entering those preferences, and you had all these flights that maybe like are not relevant to you that you're also looking at as well. And that's just created more friction for you. I think that agents sort of bring the best of both worlds, which is like, it's an efficient way for you to book that flight or basically get to the end goal with all of your preferences taken into account on your behalf, because the agent has the context on you, just like a human travel agent would.
Yeah. This is my last question here. What are you thinking is kind of the missing piece right now? Because everything is kind of fractured, but there's coordination. As you're saying, you're working with some of these teams. We had Kai from Visa on earlier this month, and he's saying very similar things. They're mostly focused on like inference right now with their CLI tool. So everyone's kind of working in different silos, but communicating. But what do you think is kind of the missing piece from like the ecosystem's perspective?
I think, I mentioned it before now. I use repeated now as well. I do think it's a coordination between, there are so many, I guess there's two things. On the actual like corporate side of the house, it is the coordination between large behemoths, whether it's OpenAI or Visa or Stripe, to build, and all of the larger merchants as well, to basically build supply and build an easy way for agents to check out that is consumer friendly. On the consumer side, I think it's trust. Like I mentioned before, AI, most consumers in the US don't trust AI at all. And they should not be trusting AI with their payment credentials for sure. Not raw credit card numbers for sure. There needs to be, just like we took nervous parents and built the guardrails and controls to make sure they felt comfortable with their teens spending money, we need to be building controls for humans to feel safe as they delegate their spend to their agents.
Where do you think there's a massive opportunity, not with what you're working on specifically, but maybe like parallel, where you're like, okay, I got to focus on what I'm doing, but there's like huge opportunity or, new tools, products, even companies popping up, or even a book. We've had folks talk about books or like mindsets. Like, where are you seeing something that is super important that you want to end on here with?
In the space of agentic commerce, I think that right now where there's a ton of opportunity is making it as easy as possible for agents to check out. That means like one, making catalogs of inventory and item information available to agents so they can easily parse it and understand it and search it. At the same time, I also think that it's like it doesn't necessarily need to be a new protocol, but basically make the Rails really straightforward for checkout to be really, really seamless. Like for agentic, for agents to be able to create a cart and then check out on behalf of the user. Today, it's using browsers to do that, and there's pros and cons on how that works. But to your point, you mentioned that browser-based makes it easy to like make a text version of every single website. I think that's very much on the right direction because we can't be waiting for these protocols to have massive adoption. Like we need to be using the existing Rails and just make them easier for agents to use.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate you coming on and sharing about Allowance and some of your background, some of your thoughts, and hope to have you back on sometime soon.
We'll love that. Thanks, Gabe.
Yeah. Right. See ya.
See ya.